finally Be Quiet has managed to launch their best iteration of their Pure Base PC case yet. However, sadly even that version comes with a few minor downsides. I feel as though there have been like 10 different predecessor versions, or at least closely related ones to the Pure Base, and not each of those models were doing great in the long run, especially since there have been reports of users, even once by some of you watching, stating that your installed PC hardware was trapped in heat. It wasn't able to breathe. It makes sense because modern hardware tends to output more and more heat, and a lot of case manufacturers weren't able or didn't want to keep up with airflow demands. Luckily, it seems Be Quiet have now learned from their mistakes and are now, in my opinion, offering us their almost fully matured Pure Base 500FX. This one not only comes with a front mesh panel, 4 pre-installed amazing fans, but also additional ARGB lighting. Furthermore, there are a few more appealing features on board here. Now that sounds great and all, but it does come at a price. The current pricing is at about $120 for the Pure Base 500FX. According to the information I was given, this is some kind of introductory or anniversary price. If things go south, we could be looking at pricing close to the $150 range. Now both $150 as well as $120 may appear a bit much considering the PC case tier we're dealing with. Of course, we need to factor in the costs for these 4 included quality fans that are part of the deal. Nonetheless, the question remains whether or not one should pick up this new Pure Base case by Be Quiet. Included with the case, as usual, comes the accessory box along with a manual. That's it. The aesthetics hardly differ at all if you're accustomed to previous Pure Base predecessors. Still, it needs to be said that the aspect lighting has been overhauled. The looks I certainly find appealing, albeit I'm not really that much into designs with rounded edges and stuff. It's not my cup of tea. I'm into minimalistic display cases or closet type of designs, I guess, with good airflow that is. Others might just yawn at just the thought of mentioned case designs. A matter of preference after all. The overall build quality is decent, while the front panel for the most part, except for the mesh part obviously, is out of plastic, the quality is good. I get the same impression from the used steel and thick tempered glass panel on here. As already mentioned, our precious hardware no longer needs to suffocate because on the front there's mesh and behind it there are 3 of Be Quiet's great 120mm Lightwings PWM fans. Those with 1700 RPM, so not the high-speed version. So we're looking at perfect case fans there. On the rear there's a slightly larger one of the same kind pre-installed, 140mm. At max, our standard ATX motherboards are being supported, and when looking over at the specs, the Pure Base 500FX really doesn't seem to stand out from the masses, which doesn't mean it isn't able to fit a good amount of fans and radiators. In the front, for instance, you could mount up to a 360/280mm radiator. On the top, you could install one with only up to 240mm, since the case is kept fairly short and compact. Now, once you take off the front cover, you'll discover a removable magnetic dust filter behind it. Oh, and the lighting in the front is connected by these pressure contacts, or whatever they are called. We also get to see a classic magnetic dust filter for the top, and on the bottom for the power supply, a long removable one. Very nice. At a price point of $120, I do have to criticize the lack of rubber grommets here. Not that I care too much about those, especially since the affected areas are nicely and cleverly covered up anyway. Aside from that, it's the fans that make up a big portion of the total price here. Once you take off the solid side panel, you'll quickly discover some noise dampening material on it. It seems as if Be Quiet takes their brand name quite seriously. Of course, impossible to miss is the PWM/ARGB hub with 6 headers in total, respectively. Very nice indeed. Although I'd like to point out that the first batches of this case are pre-connected incorrectly out of the box. In order for the PWM signal to be passed on, one of these fan plugs needs to go to the fan 1 header. Once that's done, you'll be able to control both the fan speed as well as ARGB lighting via a single cable respectively. Right next to the hub, we could also screw our usual 2.5-inch SSD into place. There are additional mounting points on the case's main side at our disposal. The bracket can easily be unscrewed to make the installation more convenient. Furthermore, the cables routed to these two optional 2.5-inch drives are neatly covered up by that small piece of plastic. Needless to say, there's also a hard drive cage primarily for 3.5-inch drives inside the Purebase 500FX. The installation of such drives is nothing out of the ordinary via screws. If needed, there's even a spot available for a single 2.5-inch drive. Of course, if you so desire, you could remove the hard drive cage from the case completely or slightly reposition the cage to make room for a front-mounted radiator. There isn't a whole lot of headroom given though. At this point, I'd like to praise Be Quiet for including a USB Type-C port on the front panel. Unfortunately, we only get a single USB-A port. Slightly disappointing, but that's complaining just for the sake of complaining. Building into the Purebase 500FX, as we're used to with Be Quiet cases, went smoothly without any hiccups. Nowadays, all the required steps have been well thought out. Not even a top-mounted radiator caused any clearance issues with the motherboard's heatsinks. That's because there's a slight offset in the radiator bracket at the top. Other than that, a beautiful internal layout in my opinion. Those of you, however, that are excited about vertical GPU installation will be disappointed, as this case does not support that. I don't care at all about that. Now, the Purebase 500FX definitely provides some decent airflow. These Lightwings fans not only look great, but perform well too, and don't blow out our brains while being at it. These fans operate at a very comfortable noise level. While my cable management skills, as so often, are pretty lackluster, I gotta admit, this case does allow for some pretty decent cable routing. You just need the talent for it. To sum things up, I'd like to say that with the Purebase 500FX, there's admittedly very little you do wrong with. There are in fact no drastic downsides to it, other than a few minor things, such as just a single USB-A port and no rubber grommets at a price of $120. But then again, it appears as if I'm just looking for drawbacks just for the sake of it, especially considering the fans themselves already make up a big portion of the case's price, as mentioned earlier before. The Purebase 500FX doesn't just come with generally appealing looks, but also offers mesh, good airflow, comes equipped with 4 phenomenal fans, sports a PWM/ARGB hub, a little bit of noise dampening, and can fit pretty much the most common radiators out there. All that leads to a clear recommendation on my part. A lot of focus seemingly has been put on ARGB and airflow, the latter of which is becoming more and more important in recent times. With that said, I thank you so much for watching and hope you'll be back when I have my next video up.